Snow covered the mountain lodge while hundreds gathered to celebrate a retired canine they barely knew. Under the bright lights, Talon was expected to become the perfect symbol of courage and loyalty. But the aging German Shepherd had already spent a lifetime proving both. When the roof began to collapse, Talon left the stage and disappeared into the wreckage. He was not searching for applause. He was searching for Gideon, the man who had promised his service was over. That night would force everyone to ask whether true gratitude means praising loyalty or finally allowing it to rest. Tell us where you're watching from, then like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and create more meaningful stories. Winter had arrived early in the San Juan Valley. By the first week of December, snow lay clean and bright across the high meadows, filling the shallow places between sagebrush and turning the distant ridgelines into long, white shoulders beneath a hard blue sky. Aspen trunks rose pale among the darker pines, their bare branches clicking softly whenever the wind moved down from the mountains. High Mesa K9 Haven stood at the far end of a county road that was plowed only after the school routes and before the abandoned mining roads. The property consisted of 3 low cedar buildings, a veterinary wing, an enclosed exercise yard, and a hydrotherapy structure whose metal roof had begun to leak above the western wall. Nothing about the place looked heroic. There were no flags over the entrance, no polished memorial plaques, and no photographs of dogs leaping through smoke. The sign beside the gate had been repainted so many times that the wood beneath the lettering had grown smooth. High Mesa K9 Haven. Retirement, rehabilitation, placement. That was what brought Gideon Rourke there. Not the word K9, the word retirement. At 49, Gideon had spent more than 2 decades being trained to enter places other people were trying to leave. He had served long enough in the Navy SEALs to know the sound of different rifles by distance, the weight of a room before anyone spoke, and the exact moment fear became useful instead of dangerous. None of that helped him understand what to do on a quiet Tuesday morning while an 11-year-old tracking dog refused to stand because the floor was cold. "Give him another second," Nolan Price said. Gideon remained crouched beside the dog, one knee on the rubber mat. The old bloodhound's name was Otis. His loose, red-brown face rested between his paws, and his eyes moved from Gideon to the open doorway as though both choices required unreasonable effort. "He heard the command," Gideon said. "He also has arthritis in both hips and deeply held opinions." Nolan leaned against the wall with a bright orange marker tucked behind one ear. At 46, the former military medic had the compact build of a man who had spent years lifting stretchers from bad angles. His hair was cut close, a short mustache followed his upper lip, and his expression suggested that nothing impressed him enough to require standing straight. Gideon looked back at Otis. The dog's breathing was calm. No distress, no trembling, just reluctance. Gideon lowered his voice. "Up." Otis blinked once. Nolan folded his arms. "Compelling argument." Gideon ignored him and slid one hand beneath the support strap around Otis's abdomen. He did not pull. He added only enough pressure to remind the dog that help existed. After several seconds, Otis shifted his forelegs forward, pushed against the mat, and stood with a long breath that sounded almost irritated. "There," Gideon said. "There," Nolan repeated. Healing through mutual resentment. Otis took 4 slow steps toward the sunlit doorway, then stopped to lean his shoulder against Gideon's leg. Gideon rested a broad hand against the dog's neck. The contact lasted less than a second. Still, Nolan noticed. He usually noticed too much. Outside, Talon lay on the wooden platform beside the exercise yard. The 10-year-old German shepherd had chosen a patch of sunlight where the snow glare reached beneath the roofline. His black and tan coat remained thick despite the season, though silver had spread unevenly around his muzzle, heavier along the left side. A small V-shaped tear marked the outer edge of his right ear. His front right leg stretched ahead of him. The left remained folded close beneath his chest, easing pressure from the shoulder that had begun stiffening during their final year of service. Talon raised his head when Gideon emerged. He did not stand. 6 months earlier, Gideon would have noticed the difference immediately and checked the yard for danger. 3 months earlier, he might have given a quiet release command out of habit, though Talon had not been working. Now, Gideon simply watched the dog's eyes move over him, confirming location, posture, hands. Only then did Talon lower his head again. It was progress. Or perhaps exhaustion had finally begun defeating discipline. Gideon was not certain which possibility troubled him more. He crossed the yard in his olive-drab combat shirt, its camouflage sleeves pulled down to his wrists against the cold. Reinforced horizontal bands wrapped the fabric at both upper arms. The shirt had outlasted several assignments and one formal request from High Mesa's administrative assistant that staff members wear something less tactically suggestive during donor visits. Gideon had responded by wearing a clean one. His charcoal work pants were dusted with straw at the knees, and a short brass whistle rested inside his chest pocket. He had not used it with Talon since the adoption paperwork became final, but every morning he transferred it from one shirt to the next. Some habits survived because they were useful. Others survived because removing them felt too much like admitting something had ended. Talon's copper-brown eyes opened as Gideon approached. The dog made no attempt to rise until Gideon reached for the gate latch. Then Talon stood at once. His first step was shorter on the left. Gideon saw it. Talon saw Gideon see it. For a moment, neither moved. "You don't have to come," Gideon said. Talon stepped through the gate. Behind them, Nolan gave a quiet whistle of his own. "That sounded like a choice," he said. "It was." "Interesting. You used to issue commands." "I still issue commands." "To dogs who are working." Gideon fastened the canvas lead to Talon's worn, reddish-brown collar. The rectangular brass tag clicked once against the buckle. Nolan came closer and crouched to inspect Talon's gait. He did not touch the shoulder immediately. Instead, he let the dog smell his knuckles and waited. "Stiffer today," Nolan said. "It dropped 12 degrees overnight." "So did my back. Nobody keeps a chart." "You complain hourly. That's a chart." Nolan looked up and smiled. "There he is." Gideon did not ask who. They walked Talon along the packed snow lane between the rehabilitation building and the eastern kennel wing. Several retired dogs rested behind reinforced glass doors, a gray-faced Belgian Malinois with a spinal brace, a black Labrador sleeping beneath 2 blankets, and a small sable shepherd mix who had spent most of her career searching collapsed buildings and now disliked enclosed rooms. High Mesa did not ask them to remain impressive. It asked whether they had eaten, whether they could rise without pain, whether they trusted a new hand near an old injury. Gideon understood usefulness. He was still learning tenderness without purpose. At the end of the lane, Talon stopped. A metal cart rattled inside the veterinary wing. Somewhere beyond the wall, a kennel latch snapped shut. Talon became completely still. His ears angled forward, his head lowered by a fraction. The muscles along his shoulders tightened beneath the dark saddle of his coat. Gideon felt his own body answer before thought arrived. Breath shallower, weight shifting, Right hand free. The world narrowed to exits, angles, distance. Then a woman laughed inside the building. A bowl clattered. The cart moved again. Nothing followed. Talon looked at Gideon. Gideon loosened his hand. "We're all right," he said. The dog remained still for another second, then placed one front paw across the toe of Gideon's right boot. It was an old gesture, not a command, not training. A refusal to move until Gideon did. The pressure was slight, but it carried the weight of years. Airfields, dark compounds, transport holds, temporary rooms where neither of them slept deeply because the other had not. Gideon looked down at the silver gathering on Talon's muzzle. The dog had spent a lifetime reading danger in Gideon's body. Now, perhaps, Talon was waiting for him to learn a different language. Gideon exhaled slowly. The tension left his shoulders. Talon removed his paw. They continued walking. Dr. Marin Hollis was waiting inside the veterinary wing with 3 folders tucked beneath one arm. At 52, she moved with the efficient speed of someone who considered wasted motion a form of dishonesty. Her ash-brown hair, silvering heavily at one temple, was twisted into a low knot. She wore a navy veterinary vest over a burgundy flannel shirt and gray work trousers. Her pale green eyes moved first to Talon's left shoulder, then to Gideon. "Shorter stride?" "First few minutes." "Any vocal response?" "No." "Appetite?" "He stole half my eggs." Marin opened one folder. "Clinically encouraging." Nolan came through the door behind them. "I've recommended more eggs." "You recommend food as treatment for conditions that do not exist." "It keeps morale stable." Marin handed Gideon the top folder. It contained the latest estimate for replacing the eastern heating system. The number at the bottom seemed too large for so little paper. Gideon read it twice. "What happened to the lower bid?" "Contractor withdrew," Marin said. "His crew took a commercial project in Telluride." "And the hydrotherapy roof?" "Still leaking." "Temporary seal?" "Temporary things are becoming permanent around here." She said it without self-pity. That was Marin's way. Facts were not softened because they were unpleasant, and concern was not performed for effect. High Mesa had enough money to remain open. That was not the same as having enough money to keep every program functioning. Without the corporate matching grant currently under review, the Eastern Kennel Wing would have to close before the coldest part of winter. Several dogs could be relocated. Others would have their rehabilitation schedules reduced. No animal would be abandoned, no emergency case refused without an alternative. The harm would be quieter than catastrophe. That made it easier for outsiders to accept and harder for Marin to forgive. "We'll manage," she said, taking the folder back. It was not optimism. It was an instruction she had been giving herself for months. By midday, sunlight filled the south-facing deck. Old dogs occupied it in uneven rows, some asleep, others watching the snowplow cross the distant road. Staff members ate soup from paper cups while taking turns clearing ice from the drainage channel beside the hydrotherapy building. Gideon sat on the lowest step with Talon beside him. For once, the shepherd did not choose a position facing the gate. He lay broadside to the yard, eyes half closed, allowing the winter sun to warm the dark fur over his spine. A truck passed on the county road. Talon's ears moved. His head did not rise. Gideon reached into his chest pocket and touched the brass whistle. Then he let it go. Near 3 p.m, the sound of engines came up the plowed drive. Not one vehicle, 3. Black SUVs moved through the gate in a measured line, their polished surfaces reflecting the snowfields and bare aspens. High Mesa's dogs began reacting in different ways. One barked sharply. Another retreated indoors. Talon rose without being asked. Marin came out of the main building, pulling on her dark parka. Nolan stood beside the rehabilitation door with his orange marker still behind his ear. The lead SUV stopped near the Cedar office. A tall man stepped down. Sterling Vane was 58, lean and straight-backed, dressed in a camel-colored technical coat over a charcoal turtleneck. Steel gray hair was combed neatly away from a high forehead, and a close silver beard sharpened his narrow jaw. His boots were made for snow, though no snow had yet been allowed to remain on them. He greeted Marin by name, shook Nolan's hand, and then looked past both of them, at Talon. Recognition appeared before introduction. "So that's him," Sterling said. Gideon did not like this sentence. Before he could answer, a forklift carrying stacked feed pallets turned near the storage shed. One tire crossed a strip of hidden ice. The machine slid sideways, slow but heavy, its rear end angling toward the walkway. The driver braked. The tires failed to catch. Gideon stepped back. Talon moved first. The German shepherd crossed in front of Gideon and planted himself between the sliding machine and Gideon's legs, body low, ears forward. There was no time for the dog to calculate that the forklift was several yards away and losing momentum. There was only the old decision: place himself between danger and his person. The forklift stopped against a snowbank. Silence held the yard for a moment. Gideon reached down and closed his hand around Talon's collar. "Easy," he said. Talon remained rigid until Gideon touched the side of his neck. Then the dog looked back at him. Sterling watched everything. He saw the speed of the response, the discipline, the scarred ear, the silver muzzle, and the retired canine who had moved despite the stiffness in his left shoulder. What Sterling did not see was Talon hesitating before settling again. He did not see Gideon's hand remain on the dog's neck longer than necessary. He did not see an old soldier struggling to understand why rest still felt like failure. Sterling saw a story, a face people would remember, a symbol no campaign could manufacture. And as he walked toward them across the bright winter yard, Gideon felt Talon shift closer to his leg. Not from fear, from recognition. Someone had arrived who was looking at Talon and seeing what the dog could still give. No one had yet asked what Talon had already given away. Sterling Vane did not begin with money. He began with a photograph. The image appeared on a tablet held by a young assistant standing near the end of High Mesa's conference table. It showed Gideon nearly 8 years earlier, his face turned partly away from the camera, one gloved hand resting against Talon's neck. Talon had been younger then, darker around the muzzle, leaner through the hips, his posture taut with the certainty of an animal who still understood every day as an assignment. Behind them, blurred by dust and distance, stood the remains of a collapsed field structure. Gideon recognized the photograph immediately. He had spent years refusing to look at it. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Sterling sat across from him, his camel-colored coat folded over the back of the chair. Without it, the charcoal turtleneck and narrow silver watch made him appear less like a man visiting a dog sanctuary and more like someone accustomed to private meetings where decisions became permanent before anyone left the room. "It was published in a regional military journal," Sterling said. "The article was brief. Most of the details were withheld. They were withheld for a reason. I'm not interested in classified details. You're showing me a photograph from a mission. I'm showing you why people remember him." Sterling's gaze moved from the tablet to Talon, who lay beside Gideon's chair with his right foreleg extended and the left tucked beneath his chest. The conference room had been warmed too aggressively by a wall unit that clicked every few minutes. Talon had chosen the coolest strip of floor near the door. Dr. Marin Hollis sat at the head of the table, 3 folders arranged in front of her with their edges perfectly aligned. Nolan leaned against a filing cabinet rather than taking a chair. He had removed the orange marker from behind his ear but kept rolling it between his fingers. Gideon did not touch the tablet. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sterling nodded to his assistant. The screen changed. A white mountain ridge appeared beneath bold black lettering. "Built to stand." The next images showed winter jackets, rescue equipment, climbing ropes, and men crossing deep snow under clear skies. Then came a clean architectural rendering of Crown Elk Lodge, Vane Frontier's private mountain resort and event property. Sterling spoke without rushing. 3 days of controlled production, primarily still photography, 1 short film, a public fundraising event at Crown Elk Lodge at the end of the campaign. High Mesa receives the full winter grant, plus the matching funds your regional partner has already pledged. Marin's expression did not change, but Gideon saw her left thumb press against the edge of the top folder. "How much use of Talon's image?" she asked. 6 months. "Regional?" "National digital use, limited print, no product packaging without separate approval." "And ownership?" "Talon remains Mr. Rourke's dog." Sterling said it as though the distinction should settle everything. Gideon looked at him. "You keep saying his name like you know him. I know what he represents." "That wasn't the question." A small pause entered the room. Sterling did not appear offended. Men like him rarely confused resistance with insult. They treated it as information. "I know he served beside you," Sterling said. "I know he continued working after an injury that would have retired a less disciplined dog. I know he was formally adopted by you when his service ended. I know you declined several interview requests afterward." "You researched us." "I research anything I ask my company to support." Nolan stopped turning the marker. Sterling continued. "Vane Frontier is prepared to cover the eastern heating replacement, the hydrotherapy roof, and operating support through the remainder of winter." Marin opened the folder nearest her. Gideon had seen the figures already, but Sterling's assistant placed the funding summary on the screen anyway. The numbers became larger when projected, as if size could make them less complicated. The proposed grant would not save High Mesa from closing. High Mesa was not closing. That mattered. But without the grant, the Regional Foundation's matching commitment would expire. The Eastern Kennel Wing would likely shut until spring. Rehabilitation schedules would be reduced. Intake would be restricted. Several dogs would need temporary transfers. No single consequence looked catastrophic. Together they formed the kind of slow damage no camera would ever record. Gideon rested one hand on the table. "No." Marin looked at him, not surprised. Sterling's assistant glanced down at her tablet. Sterling remained still. "You haven't reviewed the terms." "I heard enough." "You heard 3 days." "I heard 6 months of using him to sell equipment." "To fund care." "To sell equipment while funding care." Sterling leaned back slightly. His pale blue eyes held Gideon's without challenge. "Those things are not mutually exclusive." "No, they're just easier to defend when you say the second one last." Nolan lowered his gaze, hiding what might have been approval. Sterling folded his hands. The silver signet ring on his right little finger caught the light. Mr. Rourke, I am not asking your dog to return to active service. He is not a prop. I agree. You brought a campaign mock-up before you met him. I came prepared. You came decided. That landed. Sterling's expression did not harden, but something behind it became more careful. Marin intervened before the argument could narrow into two men defending positions they had chosen before entering the room. What activities are required? She asked. Sterling's assistant answered this time. Her name was Lila Grant, and she appeared to be in her early 30s, dressed in a slate gray suit that looked designed to survive airports rather than mountain roads. She spoke efficiently, without the emotional vocabulary Sterling used. Walking sequences in snow, static portrait work, handler interaction, a short stage appearance, no attack demonstrations, tracking drills, or obstacle work. Veterinary supervision? Marin asked. Permitted. Not permitted, Marin said. Required. Lila made a note. Gideon looked down. Talon's eyes were open. The dog had not moved, but his attention was fixed on Gideon's hand, the hand pressing too hard against the table. Gideon loosened his fingers. Talon lowered his head again. The movement was small enough that no one else appeared to notice. That made it worse. Sterling shifted the conversation away from the campaign and toward High Mesa's finances with the ease of someone changing terrain. If Vane Frontier does not proceed, the money is not held in reserve, he said. Our board will redirect it to another winter program before the end of the quarter. Marin closed the folder. That sounds like a deadline. It is a funding cycle. It has the same effect. Yes. There was no threat in Sterling's tone, only structure. That was what made his pressure difficult to reject. He did not say he would punish High Mesa. He said a system would move on without them. Gideon had known officers who worked the same way. They never ordered a man to make the wrong choice. They arranged the available choices until only one could be defended afterward. Sterling rose. Review the full proposal. I will return tomorrow afternoon if you have questions. I don't, Gideon said. Sterling looked toward Talon one more time. You may not, he replied. The others might. After the vehicles left, the conference room felt larger. No one spoke until the final engine faded beyond the gate. Nolan placed the marker on the table. Well, he said, I dislike him less than I expected, which is inconvenient. He wants to rent Talon's history, Gideon said. He wants to rent the public version of it. That's better? No, just more accurate. Marin gathered the proposal pages, but did not place them back in the folder. The answer is yours, she said. Gideon looked at her. You're the director. I can decide whether High Mesa participates. I cannot decide whether Talon does. You could refuse the campaign. I could. But you won't. Marin's pale green eyes stayed level. I haven't decided. That means you're considering it. That means I am responsible for more than one consequence. Gideon stood. Talon rose with him immediately. The old reaction. No hesitation, no question. The dog's brass tag clicked against the collar as he moved into position by Gideon's left leg. Marin watched Talon, then looked back at Gideon. So are you. The words followed him out of the room. By late afternoon, the sky had clouded over and the temperature had dropped sharply. Celeste Ward was inside the adoption office, kneeling beside an open travel crate, while a retired sable shepherd refused to enter. Celeste wore a mustard-colored insulated vest, over a rust-red thermal shirt. Her dark curls were tied low at the nape of her neck, and a canvas bag filled with treats, records, and emergency supplies crossed her body. She did not push the dog. She sat on the floor and ate a cracker while waiting. "You know that isn't dog food," Gideon said from the doorway. "It's not good human food either, but I'm committed now." The shepherd sniffed toward her hand. Celeste broke off a corner and placed it just inside the crate. "You heard?" Gideon asked. Everyone heard. 3 black SUVs create their own weather. She kept her attention on the dog. "What do you think?" "I think Sterling Vane has never loved anything he couldn't put in a quarterly report." "That wasn't what I asked." Celeste sighed and sat back against the wall. At 44, she carried strength through her forearms and shoulders from years of lifting old dogs that wanted help but hated admitting it. Her face was open and quick to show concern, which sometimes made people mistake her for less practical than she was. "I think the campaign is ugly," she said. "I also think moving 2 elderly dogs in January because we lose the East Wing is uglier." "Talon is not responsible for those dogs." "No." "Then why should he pay for them?" "He shouldn't." "But—" Celeste looked past him toward the corridor where Talon waited without entering. "But dogs pay for human decisions all the time, Gid. Usually without anyone stopping to ask whether the decision was fair." "That sounds like an argument against the campaign." "It is. It's also an argument against pretending refusing has no cost." The shepherd finally stepped into the crate. Celeste closed the door gently. Neither of them treated it as a victory. That evening, Marin called a staff meeting in the rehabilitation room. She did not make a speech. She placed the winter contingency plan on a folding table and allowed everyone to read it. The eastern wing would close first. Hydrotherapy hours would be cut. Non-urgent transfers would begin within 3 weeks. Rook's spinal procedure would not be canceled, but the preoperative rehabilitation program might be delayed until equipment access could be secured elsewhere. Rook lay nearby on a thick mat, his narrow Malinois face resting against a rolled towel. His rear legs had weakened over the previous month. When Nolan adjusted the support harness beneath his abdomen, Rook licked his wrist once and then looked away, embarrassed by dependence in the peculiar way proud dogs sometimes seemed embarrassed. A kennel technician named Aaron offered to reduce her hours. Another employee suggested delaying equipment purchases. Nolan said nothing until everyone else had finished. Then he looked at Gideon. "High Mesa tells stories every month," he said. "Photos, adoption histories, service records, recovery updates. That's how people know where the money goes." "This is different." "Yes." "Then stop making them equal." "I'm not." Nolan crossed his arms. "I'm saying the line isn't storytelling versus dignity. The line is whether the story stays true after someone pays for it." Marin glanced toward him. Nolan continued. "If they show Talon as 10 years old, stiff in one shoulder, retired, and still valuable without pretending he can outrun winter, maybe there's a version that isn't a lie." "And when they want more?" Gideon asked. "Then you say no. They already want more. They just haven't described it yet." "That may also be true." Gideon disliked that Nolan would not choose a clean side. He disliked even more that no clean side existed. The next morning, a small Vane Frontier media crew arrived for what Sterling called a visual assessment, not an official shoot. Lila Grant supervised. 2 photographers set up a neutral fabric backdrop in the heated equipment room. No dramatic lighting, No artificial snow, no logos placed on Talon. Everything was restrained enough to appear reasonable. Gideon almost hated that more. Talon wore only his reddish-brown collar. Gideon stood beside the backdrop in his olive combat shirt, arms relaxed at his sides. "Just have him look toward you," the photographer said. Gideon touched 2 fingers lightly against his thigh. Talon rose from the mat, moved into position, and looked up. The camera shutter began. Talon held steady. "Perfect," someone murmured. The word cut through Gideon more sharply than it should have. The photographer changed angles. "Could we get him seated?" Gideon gave the signal. Talon sat. "Eyes forward?" Another signal. Talon looked toward the lens. Every response remained exact. Not because Talon enjoyed the room, not because he understood the campaign, because Gideon asked. After the 3rd sequence, Gideon released him. Talon walked directly past the open water bowl and lay across Gideon's boots. His body pressed against the leather as though establishing a boundary no contract had yet named. The crew lowered their cameras. For several seconds, no one spoke. Lila looked at the dog, then at Gideon. "He trusts you completely," she said. Gideon stared down at the silver on Talon's muzzle. "That's what worries me." The assessment ended early. Sterling returned near sunset, alone this time except for a driver who remained in the vehicle. He found Gideon outside the eastern wing, replacing weather stripping around a kennel door. "I understand the test went well," Sterling said. "He followed commands." "That is generally considered success." "Depends on the command." Sterling adjusted one cuff before speaking. "Our board meets in 3 days. I need High Mesa's answer before then." 3 days. "I cannot extend the funding cycle." Gideon pressed the new strip into the doorframe. "You could recommend the grant without Talon." "I could. It would not pass." "Because the dogs here aren't enough." "Because boards fund stories they believe people will notice." "And you believe people will notice him?" "Yes." Sterling did not pretend otherwise. That honesty denied Gideon the satisfaction of exposing him. Across the yard, Talon slept in the last patch of sunlight beneath the cedar overhang. His left leg was folded close to his chest. His breathing was deep and even. For once, he did not know Gideon was watching. The sight should have brought relief. Instead, Gideon imagined calling the dog's name. Talon would wake. He would rise despite the cold in his shoulder. He would cross the yard because Gideon had asked. That was the power everyone in the building kept assigning to Gideon, the legal right, the final signature, the authority to refuse. But authority meant little when the one depending on him would never refuse in return. Sterling waited behind him. Marin watched from the veterinary window. The eastern heater coughed to life, rattled through the wall, and settled into an uneven mechanical hum. Gideon did not give an answer. Not yet. But for the first time, he understood the true shape of the decision. It was not whether Talon could endure 3 days of cameras. It was whether Gideon could ask him to. For the next 3 days, Gideon tried to solve the problem without involving Talon. He began with people who still answered when his name appeared on their phones. A retired chief in Virginia promised to forward the request to a veterans foundation. A former teammate in Arizona knew a board member at a service dog nonprofit. Another man suggested an emergency fundraiser built around Gideon's military record, an idea Gideon rejected before the sentence was finished. By noon, he had sent 5 funding summaries, revised 2 grant requests, and learned how many polite ways existed to say not before the end of the quarter. The regional foundation would not hold its matching funds. A short-term bank loan required collateral High Mesa did not have. One animal welfare trust could review an emergency application in 6 weeks, which was useful only if Winter agreed to wait. Winter showed no such interest. Snow fell through the second night, light but continuous, settling into the wheel tracks and softening the fence lines. By morning, the eastern heating system had failed twice. Each interruption lasted less than 15 minutes, but every time the blower stopped, the kennel corridor seemed to notice. The dogs raised their heads. Staff members checked thermometers. Marin restarted the unit. No alarms sounded. Nothing froze. No animals suffered. That almost made it worse. High Mesa was not collapsing. It was entering the slow, humiliating stage before collapse, when everyone worked harder to make deterioration look temporary. Gideon stood beside the heater panel while Marin reset the breaker. "You knew it was this close," he said. "I knew it was unreliable." "That is not the same answer." "No," she said. "It is the accurate one." Marin wore her gray veterinary coat over a dark green flannel shirt. Her silvered hair had come loose near one temple, but she ignored it while listening to the motor restart. Gideon watched her write the time of failure on a maintenance sheet. "You could ask me directly." "I could." "You're choosing not to." "Yes." "Why?" Marin capped her pen and looked at him. "Because if I ask you as director, you will hear an order, even if I call it a request." "You need the money." "I need a heating system." "Which means you need Talon." "No." Her voice remained level. "It means Sterling believes he needs Talon. Those are not the same thing." The distinction irritated Gideon because it was correct. Marin placed the clipboard back on its hook. "If you refuse, I will make the contingency plan work." "You say that like there is no cost." "There is always a cost." "To whom?" "That is the question you keep trying to make me answer for you." She walked away before he could decide whether the remark was unfair. He spent the rest of the morning replacing cracked insulation around a pipe that should have been replaced entirely. Talon followed him between buildings, moving easily at first, then shortening his left step as the cold deepened. Gideon noticed. He said nothing. At the hydrotherapy wing, Nolan was fitting a rear support harness beneath an elderly black shepherd named Vesta. The harness was new, the webbing still stiff, and the metal rings unscratched. "That came fast," Gideon said. Nolan tightened one strap, checked that 2 fingers fit beneath it, and helped Vesta stand. "It came from Durango." "High Mesa order it?" "No." Gideon looked at him. Nolan kept his eyes on the dog. "My card did." "How much?" "Less than a helicopter." "That is not a number." "It is the number I am using." Vesta took 3 uneven steps toward a row of rubber poles arranged along the floor. Nolan guided her hips with the strap, but allowed her front legs to choose the pace. Gideon watched the dog hesitate before each pole. "You should submit it for reimbursement." "To the account that cannot afford roof sealant?" "That is not your responsibility." Nolan glanced at him. "Interesting phrase." Gideon knew the trap before stepping into it. "Do not." "You use that sentence differently depending on who is sacrificing." "This is not the same." "No, it is smaller." Nolan guided Vesta over the first pole. "That makes it easier to ignore." Gideon left before the conversation could become useful. In the adoption office, Celeste had 2 transport files open across her desk. One belonged to a retired patrol shepherd from Pueblo.
The other belonged to a yellow Labrador whose handler had died the previous spring. Both dogs were scheduled to arrive within 10 days. Both required heated indoor housing. Celeste held the phone between her shoulder and ear while typing with both hands. "Yes, I understand the distance," she said.
"I am asking whether you can hold them until March." She listened. "No, I am not saying we no longer want them." Another pause. "I am saying our East Wing may not be available." Her voice stayed professional until the call ended. Then she placed the phone down very carefully. "How far?" Gideon asked. "The alternative facility?" "Yes." 436 miles. "Roads?" 2 mountain passes if the weather stays open. "And if it doesn't?" "They wait where they are." Celeste closed one file. The small silver paw-shaped earring in her left ear caught the office light as she turned toward him. "You found another funding option?" "Not one that arrives in time." "I'm sorry." Gideon disliked the sympathy more than he would have disliked blame. "Do you still think we should take Sterling's deal?" "I think I want a different deal." "That is not what I asked." Celeste leaned back in her chair. "I think Talon deserves rest. I also think those 2 dogs deserve not to spend January in temporary cages, because we protected the principle of rest for the dog standing closest to us." "He is not a principle." "I know." "Then stop using him as one." Celeste's face tightened, not in anger, but fatigue. "I'm not, Gid. You are." The words silenced the room. Talon lay outside the doorway, his head resting between his paws. He did not look up. Celeste lowered her voice. "You keep talking as though saying no preserves something pure. It doesn't. It moves the damage somewhere you do not have to watch." Gideon stared at the transport files. On the cover of the Labrador's record, someone had clipped a photograph. The dog stood beside a hospital bed, gray around the eyes, wearing a faded therapy vest. Gideon closed the folder. That afternoon, Aaron, the youngest kennel technician on staff, asked Marin whether employees could volunteer for a temporary wage reduction. The question came during the weekly operations meeting, in the same room where Sterling had shown Gideon the old photograph of Talon. Aaron was 27, narrow-shouldered, with a blonde braid tucked through the back of a knit cap. She spoke without drama, which made the proposal more difficult to dismiss. "If everyone gave up 4 hours a week for 2 months," she said, "we could keep one section of the East Wing open." Marin did not consult the calculator beside her. "No." "We ran the numbers." "I said no." "Dr. Hollis, I will not preserve an animal care program by making employees unable to pay rent." Aaron looked down at the table. Another technician offered to postpone vacation pay. Marin rejected that, too. Gideon sat near the wall, Talon at his feet, and listened as sacrifice spread through the room in practical suggestions. Hours, fuel costs, medical purchases, overtime, transfers. No one said Talon's name. They did not need to. Gideon looked around the table and understood something he had resisted for 3 days. If he refused, Talon would not be the only one spared. He would be the only sacrifice Gideon could see clearly enough to prevent. The rest would be divided into small portions and carried quietly by people less able to refuse. After the meeting, Gideon found Marin alone in the veterinary supply room, counting sealed medication boxes. "I'll negotiate," he said. She stopped writing. "That is not the same as agreeing." "I know." "What changed?" "Nothing." Marin waited. Gideon rubbed his thumb across the knot in the brown-red paracord around his wrist. "That's the problem." The next meeting took place by video conference. Sterling appeared from a glass-walled office overlooking a city Gideon did not recognize. Lila Grant sat beside him with the draft contract open. A third man joined from another location. Derek Sloan was 45, with a slim, well-kept face, black hair brushed away from his forehead, and a navy jacket cut too precisely to seem comfortable. He listened with his chin slightly raised, as though every conversation were an audition for clarity. Gideon began before introductions finished. 3 days maximum. Derek glanced toward Sterling. Gideon continued. No jumping, no climbing structures, no long-distance running, no pulling demonstrations, no repeated movement after veterinary limits are reached. We were not planning combat demonstrations, Derek said. I did not say combat. Derek smiled faintly. Of course. Marin approves the activity list in writing. A veterinarian evaluates Talon each morning and after every production block. That creates scheduling complications. That is not my problem. Sterling lifted one hand, signaling Derek to wait. Continue. I remain with Talon at all times. Celeste Ward has independent authority to stop a session if she sees stress, fatigue, or handling outside the agreement. Derek's expression sharpened. Independent from whom? Everyone. That is unusually broad. It is intentionally broad. Gideon listed the remaining terms. High Mesa could withdraw if the production team violated the medical limits. No image could imply Talon was still on active duty. The campaign had to identify him clearly as retired. The full grant had to reach High Mesa before the public event. When Gideon finished, Derek leaned toward his camera. With respect, this level of restriction may leave us with very little usable movement. Talon is 10. We understand that. No, Gideon said. You understand it as a production limitation. Derek folded his hands. People respond to energy. They need to see resilience, not simply be told it exists. Then film him getting up on a cold morning. That is not visually strong. It is true. Derek's smile disappeared. Truth does not automatically communicate itself. There it was. Not cruelty, not contempt. A professional belief so complete it had stopped recognizing its own danger. Sterling turned slightly toward Derek. We can build the campaign within the restrictions. Derek said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded once. Most of Gideon's conditions were accepted. Lila revised the language in real time. The clauses concerning withdrawal and independent veterinary authority took another hour. When the final draft arrived, Marin read every page. Nolan read the medical appendix. Celeste reviewed the stop work clause twice. Gideon signed last. His handwriting looked unfamiliar at the bottom of the page. The transfer confirmation arrived 12 minutes later. Enough money to begin replacing the Eastern heating system. Enough to keep the matching grant alive. Enough to make the decision look correct on paper. No one congratulated him. Gideon was grateful for that. That night, he sat on the floor of the quiet kennel wing with his back against the wall. Most of the dogs were asleep. The new snow outside reflected a dim blue light through the windows. Talon lay beside him, not pressed close, simply near enough that their shoulders touched when the dog breathed deeply. Gideon held the old brass whistle in one hand. I used to believe the hard part was sending someone into danger, he said. Talon's ear shifted toward his voice. The hard part was knowing they would go because I asked. He turned the whistle between his fingers. There were men who trusted me enough to step through a door before they had all the information. I called that discipline. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was faith borrowed against my judgment. Talon lifted his head. Gideon looked at the V-shaped tear in the dog's right ear, the silver spreading across his muzzle, the eyes that had watched him across more years than Gideon knew how to measure. I thought retirement meant I was done making that kind of decision. Talon placed his head on Gideon's knee. No absolution arrived. No sign told Gideon that he had chosen correctly. The dog simply gave him the same trust that had created the problem. Gideon closed his hand around the whistle until its edges pressed into his palm. "The worst part," he said quietly, "is that no one has to force you." Talon's eyes remained open. "You would do it because it was me." The next morning came clear after the storm. A contractor's truck arrived before sunrise, followed by a flatbed carrying the first section of the new heating system. Workers crossed the eastern yard with tool cases and rolls of insulation. Marin stood beside them with project plans tucked beneath one arm. Gideon loaded his duffel into the back of High Mesa's utility vehicle. Talon waited beside the passenger door, wearing his worn, reddish-brown collar and nothing else. For a moment, Gideon considered opening the rear compartment instead. More space, better support for the shoulder, less like the old days. Talon looked at the passenger seat. Gideon opened that door. The dog climbed in slowly, placing the right forepaw first, then adjusting his weight before bringing the left side up. Gideon steadied him beneath the chest without pretending Talon had not needed help. When he closed the door, Talon turned once and settled facing forward. Behind them, technicians began removing the failed heater from the eastern wing. Metal struck concrete. The old unit came free with a long, grinding sound. Gideon stood beside the vehicle and watched workers carry it into the snow. The decision had already begun helping dogs who would never understand its cost. That did not make the cost imaginary. He climbed behind the wheel. As they drove away from High Mesa, Talon looked back only once. Gideon kept both hands on the steering wheel. He could no longer blame Sterling's pressure, Marin's budget, Derek's campaign, or the needs of the other dogs. He had negotiated the conditions. He had signed the page. He had opened the passenger door. Whatever happened next would not be something done to him. It would be something he had chosen. Crown Elk Lodge had been built to make winter look obedient. Its timber roofs descended in clean angles beneath the mountains, each beam dark against the snow. Glass walls faced the southern ridge, catching so much pale sunlight that the lobby remained bright even when the temperature outside dropped below freezing. Heated stone paths connected the main building to a spa wing, equipment pavilion, and temporary exhibition hall erected for Vane Frontier's winter launch. Nothing was allowed to appear difficult. Snow was cleared before guests stepped into it. Ice vanished beneath salt and radiant heat. Fires were lit before anyone noticed the cold. Gideon distrusted places where nature had been edited for comfort. Talon sat beside him in the loading bay while a veterinary technician checked the movement of his left shoulder. The German Shepherd wore his own black working harness with a small, retired K9 patch fixed to one side. No company slogan crossed his back. "Flexion is unchanged," the technician said. "No swelling. 10 minutes of walking, then rest." Gideon nodded. Across the bay, Derek Sloan watched the examination while speaking quietly into a headset. His navy jacket fit too well for a room containing wet boots and stacked equipment cases. Assistants moved whenever he lifted 2 fingers, adjusting lights, camera positions, and schedules that had already been printed twice. The first production block stayed within the agreement. Talon walked beside Gideon through a shallow stretch of snow while cameras filmed from a distance.
He stood near a row of aspens, then rested beneath a wool blanket while a photographer captured the silver around his muzzle and the scar in his right ear. No one asked him to run. No one repeated a movement more than twice. Marin observed from behind the monitors, one hand holding a paper cup she never drank from. Her pale green eyes remained on Talon rather than the images appearing on the screens.
Sterling arrived halfway through the morning. He wore a charcoal turtleneck beneath a brown technical coat, his steel-gray hair untouched by the wind. He greeted Gideon with a nod, then watched Talon cross the snow in measured steps. "He still has presence," Sterling said. Gideon kept his eyes on the dog. "He has arthritis." "I can see both." Gideon was not sure Sterling could. The final morning shot placed Gideon and Talon near the lodge's stone terrace. Talon stood at Gideon's left side, body angled toward the mountains. Sunlight caught the warm, honey coloring along his chest and legs. For a few seconds, even Gideon understood why the cameras wanted him. Talon looked composed without appearing posed. Age had not diminished him. It had removed everything unnecessary. Then Talon shifted his weight from the left foreleg. The photographer lowered the camera. The moment Sterling admired was the same moment Gideon used to end the session. "That's enough." Derek checked his watch. "We are 7 minutes ahead. We're done. We still have room for one additional angle. Talon doesn't." Derek glanced at the dog, saw no limp dramatic enough to satisfy him, and looked back at Gideon. The veterinarian cleared 10 minutes. He used 10. Sterling stepped closer, not confrontational, merely persuasive. One final frame from the front. No movement. Gideon recognized the phrase from men who believed limits became flexible when approached politely. One final frame becomes 3 once the light changes. Sterling's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he nodded to Derek. "Move on." Talon was returned to the heated recovery room. The compromise looked successful from the outside. By noon, it began to change shape. Marin received a call from High Mesa concerning Rook. The old Malinois had developed sudden weakness in one rear leg during assisted exercise. It was not necessarily a new spinal injury, but the possibility required imaging and her immediate return. She found Gideon beside Talon's water bowl. "I have to go back." "How bad?" "I don't know yet." That answer carried more weight from Marin than panic would have. She crouched beside Talon, ran practiced fingers along his left shoulder, and checked the temperature of the joint. "No more than 2 additional blocks today," she said. "Short walking only. If his stride shortens, he stops." Celeste stood nearby, wearing her mustard vest and a worried expression she was trying not to display. Marin faced her. "You have stop authority." "I know." "Say it." Celeste straightened. "I can end any session involving a High Mesa dog for fatigue, stress, unsafe handling, or deviation from the approved plan." "Regardless of who objects?" "Regardless." Marin looked toward Derek. He was too far away to hear, but not too far away to understand he was being discussed. "Use it before you need to defend it," Marin said. Then she left for High Mesa. Celeste had brought 2 additional retired dogs for a small adoption and education area near the exhibition hall. One was a calm sable shepherd named Finch, who preferred women and soft blankets. The other was Marlowe, an 11-year-old yellow Labrador with a broad, pale face and white spreading across both eyebrows. Marlowe had spent most of his working life detecting narcotics at freight terminals. He loved food, disliked slippery floors, and became distressed by compressor motors and loose metal vibrating against metal. Celeste had documented the sensitivity in the event notes. The original placement map kept Marlowe far from the equipment corridor. The revised map did not. Derek's team had moved an artificial snow unit to improve the view outside the main stage windows. The machine sat behind a temporary display wall, close enough that its compressor could be felt as a low pulse through the floor. Celeste discovered the change while arranging water bowls. "That unit can't stay here," she told an event coordinator. "It's only running during camera rehearsal. It cannot run near Marlowe." The coordinator checked a tablet. "We were told this area was approved." "It was approved before the equipment moved. I'll ask production. Don't ask. Move it." The coordinator hesitated. Celeste was accustomed to persuading frightened adopters and stubborn dogs. Commanding an event staff that answered to several departments was different. Every person agreed with her concern while redirecting responsibility to someone else. By the time Derek arrived, the machine had already been connected. "We need it for 20 minutes, he said. "You need it somewhere else." "The exterior shot depends on that window. Marlowe's response is in the handling notes." Derek looked toward the Labrador, who was lying quietly beside Finch. "He seems calm." "It isn't running." Derek's attention shifted back to the stage, already moving ahead of the conversation. "We'll notify you before the test." Celeste stepped into his path. "No, you will relocate it." Derek studied her for a moment. He had a way of making disagreement seem like a failure of efficiency. "We have 180 people arriving tomorrow, multiple sponsors, and a fixed broadcast schedule. Every adjustment affects 5 others. Marlowe is not an adjustment. He is not part of the primary campaign. That is exactly why you're treating him like equipment." Gideon heard the final sentence as he approached with Talon. Derek's expression changed when he saw him. "We're resolving a placement issue." "Move the machine," Gideon said. Derek exhaled through his nose. "I'll have it shifted after the next rehearsal." "Before." "Gideon, it is disconnected." At that moment, a technician behind the display wall switched on the compressor. The sound began as a heavy mechanical cough. Then the metal housing caught a loose vibration and produced a rapid, hammering rattle. Marlowe came off the floor so quickly that his water bowl overturned. The Labrador backed into the table behind him, claws scrambling against the polished surface. The table shifted. A lightweight display frame tipped toward the adoption area. Celeste grabbed the frame with one hand and reached for Marlowe's harness with the other. The dog twisted away. He was not aggressive. He was somewhere else entirely, inside an old sound, an old place, a memory his body had kept even after his work had ended. "Shut it down!" Celeste shouted. The compressor continued. Across the exhibition floor, Talon was being positioned for the final walking shot of the day. Derek had wanted him to cross 20 feet of packed snow towards Sterling, stop beside a branded equipment crate, and hold position while the camera moved around them. Gideon stood behind the starting mark. He gave the forward signal. Talon began walking. 3 steps. 4. Then the rattling reached him. Talon stopped. The camera operator kept moving. "Continue," Derek called. Gideon did not repeat the command. Talon turned his head toward the adoption area. Marlowe had forced himself beneath the edge of a display table. The frame above him shook as Celeste tried to keep it upright. His body trembled so hard that his tags struck the floor. Talon left the marked path. He did not run. His shoulder would not allow it, And urgency did not erase age. He crossed the floor with a deliberate, uneven stride. "Gideon!" Derek said sharply. Gideon watched Talon approach Marlowe. The German Shepherd did not face the Labrador head-on. He turned his body sideways, lowered his head, and stopped several feet away. Marlowe continued struggling. Talon lay down. He placed himself between Marlowe and the compressor, broad black saddle toward the noise, chest low against the floor. He did not bark or touch the Labrador. He simply became still. The compressor finally shut off. The sudden silence felt almost violent. Marlowe's breathing remained fast. His eyes moved without focus. Talon did not look at him. He stayed sideways, offering presence without pressure. A long minute passed. Then Marlowe's claws stopped scraping. His head lowered. The trembling eased enough for Celeste to slide one hand beneath his collar. Talon released a slow breath. Marlowe answered with one of his own. No one on the production floor spoke. The cameras assigned to the campaign had stopped when Talon left his mark, but a young lighting technician near the rear wall still held a phone in one hand. She had recorded the entire moment without understanding what it would become. Derek saw the phone first. "Delete that," he said. The technician lowered it. "I was only—" "Delete it now." Gideon turned toward him. "Why?" Derek gestured at the overturned bowl, the crooked display frame, and the staff gathered around Marlowe. "Because it shows an uncontrolled animal incident in a public event area. It shows your crew ignored handling instructions. It shows a retired dog panicking beside our equipment. And Talon helping him. Talon abandoned the shot." The words stayed in the air. Sterling had arrived from a sponsor meeting during the confusion. He stood near the entrance, coat unfastened, watching Talon remain beside Marlowe. Gideon walked toward Derek. "If the only version of Talon you can use is the one who stays where you place him, then you don't want a real dog." Derek kept his voice low. "We are producing a campaign, not a documentary about operational mistakes. You want his loyalty as long as it points toward the camera. I want a coherent message. No, you want obedience without context." Sterling stepped between them before the distance became something more dangerous. "Enough!" Derek turned toward him. "The footage cannot circulate." Sterling looked at the technician's phone, then at Marlowe. "What exactly does it show?" "A preventable disruption." Celeste rose from the floor. Her dark curls had come loose around her face. One sleeve was wet from the overturned bowl. "It shows what happened after I told your team not to run that machine." Sterling's gaze moved to Derek. "Was that warning documented?" Derek did not answer immediately. Celeste did. "Yes." Sterling removed his gloves one finger at a time. "Then no one deletes anything." Derek's jaw tightened. The decision was not the transformation Gideon wanted it to be. Sterling had not defended Talon's dignity. He had recognized potential liability. Still, the video remained. By evening, it had already moved through private staff messages. No one had posted it publicly, but employees watched it in the kitchen, the loading corridor, and behind the registration desk. The campaign footage showed Talon standing against mountains. The phone video showed him lying on a polished floor beside a terrified old dog. People remembered the second one. Celeste found Gideon outside the recovery room after Talon's final veterinary check. "I thought I was protecting the whole center," she said. "You were." "No, I was protecting the outcome. Snow had begun falling in small, dry grains beyond the windows. Celeste rubbed both hands over her face. I kept telling myself that if the money helped enough dogs, the process only had to be tolerable. Marlowe is all right. That's not the point. No. She looked through the glass at Talon sleeping on a folded blanket. Marlowe lay several feet away, head turned toward him. I thought compromise became ethical if the reason was good. Gideon leaned against the wall. So did I. Marin returned after dark. Rook's condition had stabilized, but the fatigue in her face made clear the day had cost more than the drive. She read Celeste's written report in silence. Then she requested every production change made after her departure. The veterinary logs, the equipment placement map, and the original risk notes for Marlowe. Derek met them in a private meeting room overlooking the snow-covered terrace. Sterling joined by the window while Lila Grant sat with her laptop open. Marin did not raise her voice. High Mesa will withdraw tomorrow unless the campaign changes. Derek stared at her. Changes how? No more language presenting retired K9’s as permanently battle-ready. No staged movement that contradicts medical restrictions. The educational portion will include rehabilitation, age-related decline, trauma responses, and the cost of lifelong care. That is not the campaign we sold to sponsors. It is the truth you agreed to fund. Sterling turned from the window. A complete shift at this stage could lose commitments. Marin closed the report. Then lose them. The grant has already been transferred, and we will review repayment obligations. Gideon looked at her. High Mesa could not easily return the money. Marin knew that. Sterling knew it too. Her statement was not dramatic courage. It was willingness to accept an ugly consequence rather than continue pretending the arrangement remained within its ethical boundaries. Sterling walked slowly around the table. You are asking me to replace aspiration with decline. No, Marin said. I am asking you to stop treating care as decline. For the first time since arriving at High Mesa, Sterling had no immediate response. A knock interrupted the room. Leah Mercer entered without waiting for permission. She was 48, lean and compact, with ash-blonde hair cut at the jaw and a red brick technical jacket zipped to her throat. A handheld weather meter hung from one wrist. Snow crystals had collected across her shoulders. Leah supervised lodge safety with the expression of someone who expected facts to be inconvenient and had stopped apologizing for them. We have an updated mountain forecast, she said. Sterling glanced toward the falling snow outside. The event is tomorrow afternoon. I am aware. Leah placed a waterproof yellow folder on the table. The original system was expected to arrive after sunset. A localized pressure band has formed west of the ridge. Wind direction is shifting, and the moisture content is higher than predicted. How much higher? Lila asked. Enough that I want the main program moved into the lodge. Derek leaned forward. The exhibition hall is enclosed. It is temporary. It was inspected. For the original equipment load. Leah opened the folder and pointed to the structure plan. Additional LED panels and 2 lighting trusses were added this morning. Snow melt drainage along the north section is partially frozen. If wet accumulation builds there, the margin narrows. Sterling looked at Derek. Can the broadcast move? It can, Derek said, but not without losing the main stage layout, exterior camera line, and sponsor wall. We need at least 30 minutes tomorrow to close the live segment from the hall. Leah did not look at him. My recommendation is to move tonight. The forecast has not issued an evacuation warning. Derek said. "I did not say evacuate the lodge. I said stop using the temporary hall." Sterling picked up the weather report. The room waited. He had listened to Marin explain the cost of using Talon as an image. He had watched Derek defend control. He had seen a small operational warning become a frightened dog beneath a table. Now, another professional stood before him asking for action before danger became visible. Sterling read the first page. "We review conditions at sunrise," he said. Leah's face did not change. "That is later than I recommend." "I understand." Derek relaxed by a fraction. Gideon watched Sterling place the report beside the campaign contract. He had not rejected Leah's warning. That would have been simpler. He had acknowledged it, respected the language, and delayed the consequence. Outside, snow moved across the lodge windows in thin white lines. Inside the recovery room, Talon slept with Marlowe nearby. The old dogs had already accepted what the people in the meeting were still resisting. A body could only carry what it could carry. No amount of admiration changed the limit. The morning of the event looked harmless. Snow drifted lightly across Crown Elk Lodge, soft enough to settle on pine branches without bending them. The mountain ridge stood clear beneath a pale blue sky, and sunlight flashed from the lodge windows in broad sheets of white. By 9 o'clock, the lower drive was crowded with black vans, shuttle buses, media vehicles, and private cars fitted with winter tires. Guests moved between the main lodge and the temporary exhibition hall carrying paper cups, event badges, and the confident expressions of people who believed bad weather had already been accounted for. Inside, the stage glowed beneath rows of suspended lights. A wide screen displayed the built-to-stand logo over slow-motion footage of Talon walking through snow. Gideon watched from the side of the hall while a technician adjusted the retired K9 patch on Talon's harness. "Leave it," he said. The technician's hand stopped. "It's slightly turned. It's fine." Talon stood beside Gideon, calm but less rested than he had been the previous morning. His left shoulder had passed the veterinary examination, though the joint remained stiff during the first few steps after lying down. Marin had reduced his appearance to less than 6 minutes. He would walk onto the stage with Gideon, remain beside him during Sterling's opening remarks, and leave before the product presentation began. No demonstrations, no repeated entrance, no final photograph. Gideon had decided before breakfast that Talon would not appear in another campaign after that day, regardless of whether Sterling accepted Marin's revised direction. He had not told Sterling. He had not needed to. Some decisions became real before they were announced. Celeste waited near the backstage exit with Marlowe and Finch. Both retired dogs wore plain high mesa harnesses. Marlowe appeared settled after the previous day's incident, though he kept close to Celeste whenever metal equipment shifted nearby. Leah Mercer moved through the hall with a radio clipped high on her left shoulder and the waterproof yellow folder tucked beneath one arm. She checked the temporary support posts, emergency exits, and the narrow service corridor connecting the hall to the lodge. At sunrise, she had again recommended moving the event. Sterling had authorized preparations in the main ballroom, but had not canceled the exhibition hall program. The current plan was to complete the live opening, then transfer guests indoors if conditions worsened. A compromise. Gideon had learned that compromises were often delays wearing respectable clothes. At 10:15, the program began. Sterling stepped beneath the lights and welcomed nearly 200 guests, including retired handlers, representatives from law enforcement agencies, corporate sponsors, veterinarians, and journalists. He spoke well. He described the years of service given by working dogs and the responsibility owed to them after retirement.
Some of the new language came directly from Marin's demands. Rehabilitation, age-related injuries, and long-term care appeared where resilience and endurance had once dominated the speech. The words were better. Gideon still wondered whether Sterling believed them or had merely learned their usefulness. When Talon's name was announced, applause filled the hall. Talon's ears shifted toward the sound. Gideon rested 2 fingers against the dog's shoulder before giving the forward cue. They stepped onto the stage together. Talon walked without hesitation. The lights reflected across the dark saddle of his coat and caught the uneven silver around his muzzle. He did not look toward the audience. His attention moved between Gideon and the nearest exit. Sterling told the crowd that retirement did not erase worth. The audience applauded again.
Gideon looked down at Talon. The dog stood because he had been asked. That difference remained invisible to nearly everyone in the room. After 4 minutes, Gideon guided Talon off stage. Derek intercepted them near the curtain. "We have time for the sponsor photograph." "No. It is a single frame." "No." Derek lowered his voice. "The principal partners are already assembled." "Then photograph them." Gideon. This was his final appearance. The statement stopped Derek more effectively than an argument. Sterling had come through the curtain behind him. He heard it too. "Final for today?" he asked. "Final." Sterling studied Gideon's face, then Talon's lowered left shoulder. He did not challenge the decision. Not there. "Take him to rest," he said. Gideon led Talon into the secured recovery room behind the main lodge. Celeste had prepared thick blankets, water, towels, and a portable heater. Marlowe and Finch settled along the opposite wall. Outside the windows, the snow had changed. The flakes were larger now, wet enough to cling to glass before sliding downward. Wind drove them at an angle across the courtyard. Leah stood beneath the covered walkway, holding her weather meter into the air. The expression on her face made Gideon leave Talon with Celeste and step outside. "What changed?" he asked. "Pressure is falling faster than forecast." "How fast?" "Enough that the local station moved the warning forward." A gust struck the lodge, shaking snow from the roof edge. Leah looked toward the exhibition hall. "The north drainage line is freezing." "Can they clear it?" "They tried. The meltwater is refreezing behind the gutter." "And the roof load?" "Still within limit 15 minutes ago." 15 minutes is old information. Leah glanced at him. "Yes." Inside the hall, the live broadcast continued. Gideon crossed the service corridor and found Marin near the registration area. She was already speaking with Sterling. "We stop now," she said. Sterling looked toward Leah as she entered behind Gideon. Leah did not soften the recommendation. "Evacuate the temporary hall. Move everyone into the main lodge." Derek arrived with a production coordinator beside him. "We are 12 minutes from the final live segment." "You are finished now," Gideon said. Derek ignored him and addressed Sterling. "The external feed is stable. We can complete the sponsor close and transition immediately afterward." Leah opened her yellow folder and showed Sterling a live weather alert on the attached tablet. "This is no longer a planning discussion." A sound moved through the roof. Not loud, a slow metallic complaint, like a cable being drawn under too much weight. Gideon looked upward. The truss above the rear stage line had shifted less than an inch. Most people would not have noticed. Leah did. "Clear the hall," she said into her radio. Sterling stared at the support frame. Then he turned to Derek. "End the broadcast." Derek's expression tightened. We need 30 seconds to close cleanly.
End it!
The main screen went black. For one brief moment, the audience remained seated, uncertain whether the interruption belonged to the program. Then Leah's voice came through the hall speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are relocating into the main lodge as a weather precaution. Please use the marked exits and follow staff instructions.
Chairs shifted. People stood. A few laughed nervously.
The first rows moved toward the wide public doors, while staff directed those near the stage toward the service corridor. Snow struck the roof in heavy bursts. Gideon positioned himself where the flow divided. "Keep the center open," he told a security supervisor. "No one stops in the doorway." Another metallic groan traveled overhead. This one was louder. Guests began turning their heads upward. "Keep moving," Gideon said. The lights flickered.
A section of the suspended LED wall tilted several degrees. Leah shouted into a radio. Then the north roof line dropped. It did not collapse all at once. One support connection failed, transferring weight into the lighting truss. The aluminum frame twisted. Ceiling panels tore loose, followed by insulation, cables, and a sheet of wet snow that crashed across the rear staging area. The sound erased every other sound in the hall. People screamed. A display wall fell across 2 rows of empty chairs. One light struck the floor and burst into sparks before the circuit cut out. Darkness swallowed half the room. Gideon's voice changed. "Main doors! Keep moving! Do not run!" He caught a man who had turned back for a dropped bag and pushed him toward the exit. Leah directed staff away from the damaged north wall. Sterling stepped into the aisle and helped an older guest whose cane had slipped beneath a chair. There was no stage now, no sponsor wall, no distinction between executives, handlers, donors, and employees. Only bodies trying to occupy the same safe space. Gideon counted exits, visible staff, fallen sections. 2 technicians were missing from the rear production zone. He moved toward the backstage corridor. Marin grabbed his arm. "The structure is still moving. 2 crew members are unaccounted for. Security is checking. They're checking the wrong side." He had seen both technicians cross behind the acoustic partition minutes earlier. Gideon entered before Marin could stop him. Snow and powdered insulation drifted through the damaged roof. Emergency lights cast the corridor in uneven red. A fallen panel blocked the direct route, forcing him between equipment cases and a tilted display frame. "Call out," he shouted. A voice answered from farther inside. Then a gust struck the exposed structure. The frame beside Gideon shifted. He turned, but the decorative wall came down against his shoulder and drove him to the floor. A length of aluminum support landed across his lower leg, pinning it beneath the edge of a platform. Pain flashed through his knee and thigh. Not broken, he thought. Maybe not. His radio struck the floor and slid beneath the fallen wall. "Gideon!" someone called from the other side. "I'm here!" The wind took the words. He tried lifting the beam. It moved less than an inch. Dust filled his mouth. Snow melted against the back of his neck. He found a broken metal bracket within reach and struck it against the platform. 3 times. Pause. 3 times again. In the recovery room, Talon rose at the first collapse. Celeste closed one hand around his harness. "Stay." Marlowe pressed against the wall. Finch barked once, then went silent. People rushed past the window outside, moving toward the main lodge. Talon searched every face. Gideon was not among them. The German shepherd pulled toward the door. Celeste tightened her grip. "Talon, stay."
A dull metallic tapping carried through the service corridor. Talon stopped pulling. His head lifted. The tapping came again. 3 strikes. Pause. The dog turned toward the damaged hall. Celeste felt the change travel through his body. Talon. He twisted free before she could shift her grip. Not with the speed of a young working dog, with the certainty of one. He crossed the corridor against the flow of evacuees, claws slipping once on melted snow. Celeste followed, shouting for security. Talon entered the damaged backstage area through a gap beneath a fallen partition. The space narrowed around him. Wires hung low. Broken panels leaned at unstable angles. Snow covered familiar scents with wet insulation and hot metal. He stopped, tested the air, moved left. The tapping came again, weaker now. Talon found Gideon beneath the fallen frame. The dog pressed his muzzle against Gideon's chest, then seized the strap across his jacket and pulled.
The aluminum beam did not move.
"Not that way," Gideon coughed. Talon released the strap and barked. One sharp warning, then another. "Go get them." Talon remained. Gideon struck the metal bracket once more and pointed toward the opening. "Go!" The dog backed away, turned, and forced himself through the gap. He found Celeste and Leah near the service entrance. Talon barked, moved several steps into the debris, then returned. Leah understood first. "Follow him." 2 security officers brought a pry bar and hydraulic lifting tool. Talon led them through the narrow opening, checking back whenever they slowed. They found Gideon within minutes. Leah assessed the frame before anyone touched it. "Lift from this joint. Support the wall first." One officer stabilized the leaning partition while another positioned the hydraulic tool. The beam rose gradually. Gideon pulled his leg free. Talon stood so close that Leah had to push him back with one forearm.
"Give us space." The dog refused until Gideon touched his neck. "I'm all right." It was not true yet, but it was enough. They helped Gideon stand. His leg held weight, though pain spread through the thigh. "2 technicians," he said. "One is outside," Leah replied. "The other is still missing." Gideon looked at Talon. The dog was breathing hard. A shallow cut marked one front pad. "Talon." The amber-brown eyes fixed on him. "Find." The old command entered the space between them. Talon turned. He moved deeper along the partition line, nose low, then raised his head near an acoustic wall that had folded inward. He barked twice. A man answered from behind it. Security began clearing the edge. Talon suddenly stepped back and growled low in his chest. Above them, a section of lighting frame trembled. Leah saw it. "Everyone out from under that line!" The group shifted seconds before a crossbar dropped where one officer had been kneeling. They reached the trapped technician from the opposite side. His arm was cut and one ankle injured, but he remained conscious. By the time rescuers brought him into the main lodge, the worst of the structural movement had stopped. Outside, the storm continued for another hour. Inside, blankets covered guests sitting along ballroom walls. Paramedics treated bruises, minor cuts, and early hypothermia. Marin examined Talon beside Gideon near the stone fireplace. The dog's left shoulder was swollen. 2 pads were scraped raw. "He's done," Marin said. Gideon looked at her. "Not today," she added. "Done." Across the ballroom, reporters were already speaking into cameras. The words hero and miracle passed from one broadcast to another. Sterling stood near the doorway with wet snow melting on his coat. He had spent the evacuation moving guests and carrying supply boxes, his carefully controlled appearance reduced to damp hair and a torn cuff. He watched Talon lower himself onto a rescue blanket. The dog rested his head against Gideon's uninjured leg. No camera had directed him there. No campaign owned the gesture. Talon had gone first to the person around whom his life had been built. Then, only when Gideon asked, he had turned back toward the others. Sterling had wanted loyalty because it looked powerful. Now he saw what it cost. By the following morning, Talon belonged to people who had never met him. His name moved across local broadcasts before sunrise. By 8, national networks had requested interviews. A streaming company wanted access to the rescue footage. 2 advertising agencies offered to produce a short documentary at no cost, provided they received distribution rights. Every message used nearly the same words: courage, loyalty, instinct, hero. None mentioned the swollen shoulder beneath the ice wrap. Crown Elk Lodge had converted a ground-floor conference suite into a temporary treatment area. Folding privacy screens separated the injured guests. Paramedics moved between cots while lodge staff carried coffee, blankets, dry clothing, and paperwork. Talon lay on a padded mat near the far wall. One front paw was wrapped in white bandage. A cold pack rested over his left shoulder beneath a dark towel. Medication had softened the alertness in his copper-brown eyes, but he still lifted his head whenever Gideon moved beyond reach. Gideon sat beside him with one leg extended. The bruising beneath his work pants had darkened during the night, though imaging had shown no fracture. Marin knelt beside Talon and pressed 2 fingers gently along the upper leg. The German shepherd's breathing changed. Not enough for a sound, enough for her to stop. "The muscle strain is moderate," she said. "The joint itself appears stable, but inflammation around the old degeneration has increased." "How long?" "Strict rest for at least 3 weeks, controlled movement after that, depending on response." "And work?" Marin removed the cold pack and replaced it after checking the skin. "No more work." Gideon looked at her. She did not qualify the statement. No demonstrations, no search exercises, no ceremonial appearances that require prolonged standing, no situations where anyone says it will only take 5 minutes. Talon lowered his head again. Gideon rested one hand over the worn leather collar. "He found me because I brought him here." "He found you because you were missing." "I gave him the second command." "Yes." "He was already hurt." "You did not know the extent." "I knew he was 10. Marin sat back on her heels. The fatigue around her eyes had deepened overnight. She had spent hours treating Talon, checking the other dogs, coordinating with responders, and answering questions from people who wanted High Mesa to describe the rescue before the injured had left the building. "You want this to be entirely your fault," she said. Gideon looked at her sharply. "No." "You do. Because if it is entirely yours, then it remains something you understand. One man made one bad decision. One man carries the consequence. I signed the contract. I approved the partnership. I gave the command. I allowed a financial structure where your consent carried the cost of our entire winter." Gideon said nothing. Marin folded the towel around the cold pack with unnecessary precision. "No one took your legal right to say no," she continued. "We only built a situation in which saying no would harm enough others that the right became difficult to use." "That does not excuse me." "I did not ask it to." Across the temporary clinic, someone turned on a television. The screen showed footage of Crown Elk Lodge beneath the storm. A reporter stood in front of emergency vehicles, while a banner identified Talon as the retired canine who saved Crown Elk. Gideon reached for the remote and shut it off. Talon did not stir. A knock came at the door. Sterling entered first. Derek followed with the laptop tucked beneath one arm, and Lila Grant came behind them carrying several printed documents. Sterling had changed clothes, but not fully recovered his usual appearance. His steel-gray hair remained slightly uneven, and a narrow tear marked one cuff of his black coat. Derek looked untouched by the storm. He placed the laptop on a folding table without waiting to be invited. "We have a narrow window," he said. Marin stood. "For what?" "Public attention." Derek opened a presentation already prepared. The first slide showed Talon emerging through debris. The image had been taken by a lodge employee from behind the security team. Gideon was not visible. The composition made Talon appear to be moving alone through the wreckage. The next slide carried a proposed slogan: "Loyalty does not retire." Gideon stared at it. Derek began speaking faster. "The story has crossed every major regional market. We have inbound interest from 3 national morning programs, 2 veteran organizations, and a major outdoor retailer. If we move immediately, this can become a national campaign tied to retirement care for working dogs." "Turn it off," Gideon said. Derek glanced at him. "This could fund High Mesa for years." "Turn it off." Sterling lifted a hand. Derek stopped, but he did not close the laptop. Sterling faced Gideon. "We would need your approval for further image use." "You already have 6 months." "Not for the rescue material." "No." Sterling waited. Gideon had expected anger to come. It did not. Anger would have been easier. Instead, he stood slowly, walked to Talon's mat, and looked at Sterling. "Come here." Sterling hesitated only a moment before following. Gideon pointed to the bandaged paw. "That happened crossing broken panels." Then to the cold pack. "That shoulder was already damaged before your campaign." Sterling looked down. Talon opened his eyes but did not lift his head. "Look at him," Gideon said. "I am." "No. You are waiting for me to finish so you can improve the proposal." Sterling's jaw tightened. Gideon crouched beside Talon. "This is what your campaign keeps removing, not because you hate him, because pain does not fit the part you need him to play." Sterling's eyes moved over the silver muzzle, the uneven breathing, the leg folded carefully beneath the dog's chest. "No lights," Gideon said. "No mountain behind him, no audience. Just an old dog under medication because he did what he has spent his entire life believing he should do." Derek closed the laptop halfway. "The campaign would center on long-term care." Gideon did not look at him. "You are still talking about what his injury can do for you." Derek's voice cooled. "Public attention is temporary. Refusing to use it does not make the injury more honorable." "No," Gideon said. "It makes it his." The room fell quiet. Talon shifted his head until his muzzle touched Gideon's boot. It was a weak movement, almost lazy from the medication. Still, Gideon felt it like a verdict. Sterling looked toward the dark television screen. "When I founded Vane Frontier," he said, "we made equipment for people who actually used it. Guides, rescue crews, winter workers. We tested everything ourselves." Derek said nothing. Sterling continued. "Then we grew. We acquired companies, added lifestyle lines, entered markets I had never entered physically." He smiled once without humor. "Last year, our research said customers no longer knew what we stood for." "So you wanted Talon to tell them?" Gideon said. Yes. The honesty surprised no one by then. Sterling adjusted the torn cuff, then seemed to realize what he was doing and let his hand fall. I thought if people saw him beside our name, they would associate us with something real again. Talon is not responsible for making your company real. No. He is not responsible for fixing High Mesa either. Marin looked down at the veterinary chart in her hands. Sterling absorbed the second sentence more slowly than the first. Beyond the clinic doors, phones continued ringing. The world outside was assigning Talon meaning faster than anyone inside could stop it. Sterling turned toward Derek. Cancel the national campaign draft. Derek's eyes narrowed. Before the board reviews it? Yes. You are giving away the strongest brand opportunity this company has had in a decade. I said cancel it. Derek stepped closer to him. This is not exploitation if the money supports the cause. Sterling looked at Talon. That is what we told ourselves before yesterday. Derek's expression shifted from persuasion to impatience. The roof failure and the campaign are separate matters. No, Leah said from the doorway. No one had heard her enter. She held the first completed safety report beneath one arm. The event schedule influenced the delay. The additional production load influenced the structure. Equipment changes were made without full operational review. They are not separate. Derek faced her. The storm caused the failure. The storm exposed the decisions. Leah placed the report on the table. The document included the frozen drainage line, the added lighting trusses, the delayed relocation, and the ignored warning concerning Marlowe's area. Sterling opened it. Each page removed another place to hide. Derek stood motionless while Sterling read. When Sterling reached the section recording the exact time Leah recommended evacuation, he stopped. His own authorization to delay appeared beneath it. Not Derek's alone. His. Sterling closed the report. I want an independent review of the entire event, he said. Derek gave a short laugh of disbelief. You are allowing one incident to dismantle months of work. One incident? One weather event. 2 preventable warnings were minimized in 24 hours. And now you want to punish the company for responding imperfectly under pressure? Sterling's voice remained quiet. No. I want to know whether the company has become skilled at explaining harm faster than preventing it. Derek looked from Sterling to Gideon, then to the closed laptop. His face hardened. You built this company on strong images. I built it on strong equipment. Customers do not know the difference anymore. Sterling held his gaze. That may be the problem. The formal review took 11 days. During that time, Talon returned to High Mesa in a padded transport crate, where Nolan and Marin began a strict rehabilitation schedule. Gideon slept on a folding cot beside him for the first 3 nights, though Talon spent most of each night unconscious from medication. News requests continued. High Mesa issued only one statement. Talon was recovering. No additional image rights had been granted, and the center would not participate in promotional coverage until an ethics review was complete. The attention began to move elsewhere. Derek treated that as proof of wasted opportunity. The independent report concluded that no single person had caused the roof failure. The storm intensified rapidly. The temporary structure had passed its original inspection. However, production additions had reduced the safety margin, operational concerns were repeatedly subordinated to schedule, and senior leadership had failed to act when enough warning existed. Derek had not ordered anyone to endanger guests. He had done something more ordinary. He had trained everyone beneath him to treat delay as failure and interruption as weakness. At the final review meeting, he defended every decision as reasonable in isolation. The machine near Marlow had been temporary. The additional stage load had been approved informally. The broadcast needed only a few more minutes. The rescue footage could still help thousands of animals. Sterling listened until Derek finished. Then he terminated his contract. Not because Derek alone had caused the disaster, because he had learned nothing from it. Sterling did not exempt himself. He accepted the board's formal reprimand, surrendered operational control over future live events, and ordered all remaining Talon-related material removed from company channels unless Gideon later approved its educational use. 2 weeks after the storm, Sterling visited High Mesa. This time, he arrived in one vehicle. No camera crew accompanied him. Talon lay behind the glass wall of the rehabilitation room while Nolan guided his left foreleg through a slow range-of-motion exercise. Gideon watched from inside. Sterling remained in the corridor with Marin and a woman Gideon had not met. Her name was Evelyn Shaw. At 55, Evelyn had the unhurried manner of someone accustomed to entering organizations after everyone had exhausted their favorite excuses. She wore a dark plum coat over a gray wool dress and carried a canvas portfolio rather than a briefcase. Her short, silver-brown hair curved neatly around a broad, composed face. She had spent 20 years restructuring non-profit health and animal welfare organizations. "I do not rescue institutions," she told Gideon after they were introduced. "I show them where they have confused emergency generosity with financial planning." Marin did not appear offended. That suggested she had already heard worse. The proposal on the table was no longer a sponsorship campaign. It was the beginning of a diversified retirement care fund. Vane Frontier would provide the initial commitment. A veterans association, 2 regional police foundations, a veterinary welfare trust, and several local businesses would be invited to contribute. Public donations would be recurring rather than tied to one dramatic story. No donor would receive exclusive control over an individual dog's image. No sponsor would hold veto power. Sterling requested 1 seat on the governing board. 1, Evelyn said, and company recognition in the annual report. Yes. Program naming? Subject to board approval and never after a living animal. Sterling considered that. I can accept it. Gideon looked through the glass at Talon. The dog was concentrating on Nolan's hand, taking one careful step and then another. You still want something, Gideon said. Sterling did not deny it. I want the company's support to be visible. Why? Because I have shareholders, employees, and a board. Also because recognition encourages continued funding. That sounds like the old argument. It is not entirely different. The answer was imperfect. Gideon trusted it more for that reason. Sterling looked through the glass. I thought giving money entitled me to shape what the money touched. And now? Now I think it entitles me to an accounting. Evelyn opened her portfolio. That is the first useful sentence he has given me all week. Marin almost smiled. The fund would take months to establish. Legal reviews, donor agreements, governance rules, and conflict of interest policies had to be written. Nothing about it resembled a sudden miracle. It was paperwork, meetings, limits, the slow construction of a system designed not to need another Talon. Sterling signed the initial commitment at the end of the afternoon. Before leaving, he stopped outside the rehabilitation room. Talon noticed him through the glass. The German shepherd did not rise. Sterling did not call him. For several seconds, man and dog simply looked at each other across the barrier. Then, Talon lowered his head and returned his attention to Gideon. Sterling accepted the dismissal. He walked away without asking for anything to remember it by. 3 months after the storm, winter still held the San Juan Valley in bright silence. Snow covered the high meadow beyond High Mesa K9 Haven, smooth except where wind had pressed shallow ridges into its surface. The aspens stood bare and pale against the dark pines. On clear mornings, sunlight struck the roofs so sharply that the whole center appeared outlined in white fire. The eastern kennel wing was warm. That was the first change everyone noticed. The new heating system started without rattling, coughing, or requiring Marin to stand beside the breaker with a maintenance log. The hydrotherapy roof no longer dripped into plastic buckets. Repairs had not made High Mesa wealthy, but they had allowed the center to stop treating every cold night as a test of endurance. The long-term fund Evelyn Shaw was building remained incomplete. Lawyers were still revising governance documents. Police associations and veterinary foundations were reviewing contribution agreements. Vane Frontier's initial commitment had been transferred into an account that no single donor controlled. There were still meetings, delays, and arguments over language. Gideon had come to respect the absence of miracles. Systems built slowly were harder for one person to own. Talon's recovery moved at the same pace. On warmer afternoons, the 10-year-old German Shepherd could walk the full length of the exercise lane without shortening his stride. On cold mornings, his left shoulder remained stiff enough that he paused before stepping down from the porch. The scraped pads had healed. The deeper injury had not disappeared. Marin called it manageable. Nolan called it a permanent negotiation between movement and pain. Gideon called it nothing at all. Naming it did not make him more patient. That morning, Talon stopped halfway between the staff residence and the rehabilitation wing. He lowered his muzzle toward a patch of snow beside the fence and began investigating a trail left by some small animal during the night. Gideon stood several steps ahead. For most of their life together, a pause like that would have lasted only until he gave a quiet command. Forward. Leave it. Come. The words remained available. Talon continued smelling the snow. Gideon looked toward the rehabilitation building. Nolan was waiting for them. The exercise schedule had begun 8 minutes earlier. His hand moved toward the brass whistle inside his chest pocket, then stopped. Talon pushed his nose deeper into the powder, sneezed, and shifted toward another set of tracks. Gideon waited. Nearly 2 minutes passed before the dog lifted his head and chose to continue walking. "You finished?" Gideon asked. Talon moved past him without apology. By the time they reached the rehabilitation wing, Nolan was standing in the doorway with the orange marker behind one ear. "You're late," he said. He had business. "National security?" "Field mouse." Nolan nodded solemnly. "Unstable region." Inside, Talon completed 12 controlled passes between low rubber markers. His movements were slow but balanced. Gideon walked beside him without using the lead unless the floor became slick. After the final pass, Nolan reached for the support harness. Talon turned away and walked toward the sunlit corner of the room. Gideon almost called him back. Nolan saw the command form before it was spoken. "He's done." "He has one cooling lap." "He has decided he does not." "He doesn't decide the medical plan." "No, but he gets an opinion about when his body is tired." Gideon folded his arms. Nolan waited. Talon lowered himself onto the mat, extending his right front leg while folding the left close beneath his chest. His breathing remained steady. No distress, no fear, just enough. Gideon looked away first. On the wall near the therapy equipment hung Talon's old black working harness. The retired K9 patch had been removed after the storm, but faint stitching marks remained where it had been attached. One strap still carried a pale scratch from the collapsed exhibition hall. Gideon had left the harness there for weeks. He told himself it belonged with the rehabilitation equipment. In truth, he had not decided what an object became after its purpose ended. That afternoon he took it down. The buckles made a familiar sound in his hands. Talon raised his head from the mat at once, not alarmed, ready. Gideon felt the old response move through both of them. The harness had meant work. It had meant Gideon knew where they were going, and Talon knew what would be required when they arrived. Talon stood. His weight shifted away from the left shoulder, but he stood. Gideon held the harness for several seconds. Then he lowered it. No. Talon remained in place. Gideon carried the equipment into the archive room behind Marin's office. High Mesa stored service records, retired collars, unit photographs, adoption files, and equipment donated by former handlers. Nothing was displayed as a trophy. Each object was labeled with dates, function, and medical history. Gideon placed Talon's harness inside an empty storage box. He wrote the label himself. Talon retired, military working dog, final operational use, Crown Elk Lodge. Rescue removed from service by medical order. He stared at the last line, then added another. Owned by Gideon Rourke, not available for promotional use. Marin stood in the doorway. She had come quietly, her navy veterinary vest open over a forest green shirt. A folder rested in one hand. You know no one can use it without permission, she said. I know. Then why write it? So the next person knows too. Marin stepped into the room. I gave the board my final incident statement this morning. Gideon closed the box. How did they take it? One member said I was being unnecessarily damaging to High Mesa's reputation. Were you? Yes. That answer made him look at her. Marin rested the folder on a shelf. I told them we allowed financial pressure to narrow our judgment. I told them we protected the institution by asking one retired dog and one employee to carry a decision the board should have addressed years earlier. They'll keep you? That was not the question I asked them. What did you ask? Whether they wanted an organization that looked trustworthy or one willing to become trustworthy. Gideon leaned against the shelf. And? They tabled the discussion. He almost smiled. Marin did not. Several staff members supported the statement, she continued. Others think admitting failure will frighten donors. Will it? Some. Sterling? He signed the new governance agreement this morning. That mattered more than Gideon expected. Marin looked at the closed box. You do not have to bury everything that belonged to your old life. I'm not burying it. What are you doing? Stopping it from calling him back. Outside the archive room, Talon had followed as far as the hallway. He did not enter. He lay across the doorway, watching Gideon without the rigid readiness the harness had awakened. Gideon understood then that the object had not been keeping Talon on duty by itself. He had. A week later, Dr. Lenora Beck began visiting High Mesa every Thursday. She did not hold sessions in an office. Her first meeting with Gideon happened while he was replacing a damaged latch on the south exercise gate. Lenora stood on the other side of the fence in a quilted navy vest, a dusty blue sweater, and boots already marked with kennel mud. At 50, she had a broad, composed face framed by shoulder-length salt and pepper hair. Round reading glasses hung from a cord at her chest, though she rarely wore them while speaking. Her calm,
did not feel delicate.
It had the weight of something practiced. "You're installing that backward," she said. Gideon checked the hinge. "No." Lenora examined it for several seconds. "You're right." "You do this with patience?" "I prefer to know how people respond before I tell them I have a proposal." "I am not a patient." "I did not say you were." She opened the gate after he finished and watched Talon step through. The German shepherd stopped near her, smelled the air around her coat, and continued toward the sunny side of the yard. Lenora did not reach for him. That earned Gideon's attention. Marin had asked her to help develop a transition program for retired handlers and veterans living with aging working dogs. The program would combine veterinary education, peer support, and licensed mental health care. Lenora wanted Gideon involved. "No," he said. She accepted the answer so easily that he became suspicious. "You're not going to argue?" "I will ask why first." "I am not trained." "You would not provide therapy." "I am not stable enough to guide anyone." "Stable is not a professional qualification." "It should be." Lenora put on her glasses and inspected the new latch. "A peer coordinator is not an example of perfect recovery," she said. "He is someone who can remain in the room when another person has no useful language yet." "There are people better at talking." "That may be why they will not be trusted." Gideon looked across the yard. Talon had stopped beside a patch of sunlight and lowered himself into the snow. "Healing is not my area." "No," Lenora said. "Staying, maybe." The sentence followed him for the rest of the week. Celeste's new fundraising materials arrived soon afterward. There were no dramatic rescue photographs. One page showed Nolan supporting Vesta through a slow exercise. Another showed a retired patrol dog asleep beneath a heat lamp. Marlowe appeared beside a paragraph about noise sensitivity and long-term trauma care. Talon was included only in a photograph approved by Gideon, lying on the high mesa porch, muzzle silver, left leg folded beneath him. The caption did not mention Crown Elk. It read, "Service ends. Care does not." Celeste found Gideon reading it in the staff kitchen. "Too sentimental?" she asked. "No." "Too plain?" "No." "You are making this difficult." "It's honest." She looked relieved. Sterling returned during a light snowfall near the end of February. One SUV came through the gate. No assistant stepped out. No camera followed him. He wore a dark parka without a visible company logo and carried a leather document folder under one arm. He stopped outside the fence when he saw Gideon and Talon crossing the meadow lane. Talon's pace was slower than it had been before the storm. His left step shortened whenever the path tilted uphill. Sterling watched without calling his name. He did not lift a phone. He waited. Gideon reached the gate and opened it. Only then did Sterling enter. "The final commitment agreement," Sterling said, offering the folder. "Evelyn asked me to deliver the signed copy." Gideon took it. Why didn't she mail it? "She did not ask me to deliver it personally." They stood in the falling snow. Sterling looked toward Talon, who had stopped several yards away to smell the base of an aspen. "I used to believe value increased with visibility," Sterling said. "Useful belief for advertising. It built a large company." "Did it build a good one?" Sterling's mouth moved slightly. "Not always." Talon finished with the tree and continued toward the porch without acknowledging either man. Sterling watched him go. "There are things people may never appreciate unless someone shows them." "That's true." "And there are things," Sterling said, that seemed to lose something as soon as people tried to display them. Gideon held the signed folder beneath one arm. Some things keep their value because no one owns the moment. Sterling nodded. It was not an apology. Gideon did not offer forgiveness. They stood together long enough for the silence to stop feeling hostile. Then Gideon led him toward the main building. At the end of winter, High Mesa held a small open day. No stage was constructed. No live broadcast was scheduled. Local businesses brought coffee, soup, blankets, and dog food. Former handlers toured the rehabilitation wing. Prospective adopters met retired dogs in quiet rooms rather than crowded display areas. Talon spent most of the morning asleep on the porch. Near noon, an older pickup stopped outside the gate. A man remained behind the wheel for almost 10 minutes. He appeared to be in his early 50s, with a heavy winter coat, a weathered face, and close-cropped gray hair. In the passenger seat sat a chocolate Labrador with a broad chest and cloudy eyes. The man finally stepped out, but did not open the gate. Gideon walked toward him. "You here for the program?" he asked. The stranger looked past him at the buildings. "Maybe." "What's his name?" "Cooper." The Labrador watched Gideon through the windshield. "Retired?" "Search and rescue." The man's hand remained on the truck door. "I was told there'd be people here who understood the adjustment." "There are." "I'm not staying long." Gideon recognized the sentence. He did not challenge it. "Coffee's inside. You can leave before you finish it." The man looked at him for the first time. "That the official program?" "No." "Good." Gideon opened the gate. The man still did not move. Talon had risen from the porch. He came down the steps slowly, crossed part of the yard, and stopped several feet inside the entrance. He did not approach the stranger or stare at Cooper. He simply lay down, close enough to be seen, far enough to leave the choice intact. The man looked at Talon for a long time. Then he opened the passenger door for Cooper. Gideon understood that Talon's final mission had never been the rescue at Crown Elk Lodge. It was not finding Gideon beneath the wreckage or leading security toward the missing technician. Those acts belonged to the life Talon already knew. The harder work came afterward, teaching Gideon that presence did not need to become service, showing High Mesa that gratitude could not be measured by how much more a retired dog was willing to give, reminding strangers at the gate that rest was not surrender. Late that afternoon, the open day ended. Tire tracks led away through softening snow. Staff carried empty coffee urns inside. The remaining dogs settled into the warm kennel wings. Gideon walked toward the staff residence. Talon followed for part of the way. Then the German Shepherd stopped. The old habit would have brought him directly to Gideon's left side. Instead, Talon turned toward the aspens. He stood there with his silver muzzle lifted, reading something in the wind that had nothing to do with danger or work. Gideon waited. Talon chose the longer path around the trees. Gideon did not call him back. He changed direction and followed. They moved slowly through the bright snow, not in formation and not at equal distance. Sometimes Talon walked ahead, sometimes Gideon caught up. Neither corrected the other. Beyond the aspens, the roofs of High Mesa came into view. Warm light shone from the eastern wing. Talon paused once more at the edge of the yard. Then he continued home. For years, loyalty had meant one of them giving a command and the other obeying it. Now it meant something quieter. Both were free to choose another direction. Both still chose the same place. Sometimes the hardest kind of loyalty is not asking someone to keep proving it. Talon had already given years of courage, trust, and service. What Gideon finally learned was that love does not always mean calling a faithful companion forward. Sometimes it means setting down the harness, releasing the command, and allowing the one who has carried so much to choose rest. The same question can reach us in ordinary life. Do we value people for who they are, or only for what they can continue doing for us? May God give us the wisdom to recognize when support has become pressure and the courage to protect what should never be bought. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, difficult choices, and the quiet grace of learning to let go. May peace find you wherever you are, and may the people and animals you love always know they are worth more than what they can provide.